that temperature actually is going down a little bit. And our goal here is to reduce that temperature down as much as we can down into the green. And so what you'll see is that over time, those temperatures will continue to go down and down and down as his flexion tone temperature actually is going down a little bit.
So very good.
And so this is kind of just a quick explanation of the thermometer activity here. We have about a minute left. And in that minute, I will quickly go back to my topic about dose. And so we just talked briefly about how dose is a quick explanation of every aspect of medical practice, rehab included. And sort of central, maybe provocative question that I posed early on was, are we getting enough sort of standard outpatient rehab? And this is really a tough question to answer. And sort of our first insights were actually central, maybe provocative question in about 2008 from a seminal research paper published by Housley. And they asked a very simple question.
You're not live. Do you want to go live?
You get in a standard rehab session, an hour-long session. And so what they did is they went out and they sent a bunch of...
Do you know how to go live on Facebook, Dave?
You're not, no, but I don't think you can tell me. YouTube is not, it says it's streaming. You're saying it's not?
And they watched hundreds of
Do you know how to go live on? I went to the link and I just see it just says well, the live chat is there.
YouTube is not, it says it's streaming. You're saying it's not?
It just has a Motus Hand logo. Do you know how to go live on? I went to the link and I just see a bottom left. Well, the live chat is there.
YouTube is not, it says it's streaming. You're saying it's not?
It just has a Motus Hand logo. Do you know how to go live on? I went to the link and I just see a bottom left.
So you check Facebook.
Well, the live chat is there.
YouTube is not, it says it's streaming. You're saying it's not?
It just has a Motus Hand logo. Do you know how to go live on? Facebook is live. Bottom left.
So you check Facebook. It's black.
YouTube is not, no, it's like regularly live. Nick, whatever you say. It has a Motus Hand logo. Do you know how to go live? Facebook is live. Bottom left.
So you check Facebook. It's black.
No, it's like regularly live. Nick, whatever you say. It has a Motus Hand logo. Do you know how to go live? Facebook is live. Bottom left. So you check Facebook. It's black. No, it's like regularly live.
Which is one of the reasons why
Nick, whatever you say. It has a Motus Hand
design
logo.
in
Do you know how to go Facebook is live. Bottom left. So you check Facebook. It's black. No, it's like regularly live. Nick, whatever you say.
Very good. So it looks like Patrick has now progressed on to
Facebook is live.
strongman, which is a first activity in which you have to work on a couple of flexion sensors. So this one is a volitional control activity. So for those of you like Patrick has now progressed possibly really good tool. Also, you have maybe very, very small, minimal active movement. You can also participate in this activity. So this simply because the hand measure will help the dynamic system. And that means that the device can be able to monitor very, very small amount and amplify those. You can actually simply because, and so we'll go ahead and start this activity. So if you have the thermometer activity, feel free to go ahead and progress and start with strongman. And I'm going to start playing this. I also quickly want to say, I know Patrick is listening here, and if you are also listening across the country from him mentors, don't feel like you have to necessarily wait for me to start the activity. Feel free to go ahead and proceed. I also want to say, I know Patrick, go ahead and actually start playing your Patrick. And one thing that will be shown in this activity is one of the really interesting ways that as a provider I can help modify the activity such that it's start taking an repetition. And that is I can actually find how many repetitions you do versus how much time you have to rest. So as you progress through rehab, you'll be able to while Patrick is starting here, we can go ahead and just quickly highlight some of the key features of the Hand Mentor. And on the right-hand side, you can see that we now have a leaderboard. And so this allows you to really kind of compare how you are stacking up, if you will, against all those other stroke survivors across the country who are playing. And so again, that score is directly tied to how many movements you do. And so our goal then is to really increase those numbers, those scores and those numbers of repetitions. So here we go. So Patrick has started. One thing that you'll notice is that at the beginning of many of the activities, the Hand Mentor will actually start by bringing you up to a midpoint. And I'll quickly take a moment here to describe what that is. A midpoint is a middle of the road, if you will, of your range of motion. And so as I can move my wrist down into flexion and up into extension, there is a range of which I can go maximally into extension and maximally into flexion. And there's going to be a calculated midpoint of that range. So if I'm midpoint around here, kind of neutral, that's going to be around 0 degrees. And the Hand Mentor, it's going to calculate these values for you when you first get it. And for many of the activities, it will actually start you at that midpoint. And it will do this by providing a little bit of assistance into the device to help you move up. And then it will ask you to do complete the movement to then achieve the goal of the various activities. And so for this one, you'll see that Patrick's Hand Mentor helps him to move up to his neutral position, which may be different than your neutral position, but that's totally fine. He'll then be asked with those green arrows and the graphic on the screen to move down and pick up the weight. And this is that first movement that I'm talking about, going down into flexion. If you feel a little bit of resistance, that's fine in the movement. There's a little bit of residual pressure in there. And if you do have trouble moving against that resistance, that's totally normal. The Hand Mentor will detect this and will help by relieving some of that pressure over time as you then begin to move down. Once you hit that goal of that down movement, and this would be that prescribed flexion angle, those arrows will actually turn around. And as you notice, Patrick here will get down to our bottom goal, as we say. And then those values, the actual arrows will switch around and go point up. And so then once he picks up the bar, those arrows are going to indicate that he should move up into extension. And as Patrick then moves up into extension, you'll see that that blue bar on the right-hand side will also show a level of completion. And many of the activities also have that indication for you to have sort of two visuals to know when you have completed the actual activity. And just to show you what this looks like on my end, I'll actually go over here to my evaluations page so I can show you what these repetitions look like. And we can look at the amount of assistance that's required to actually complete these tasks. So we actually had a little bit of data here. Looks like Patrick had his device on earlier. I'll go ahead and clear this, and that'll give us a good representation of his movements now. So again, this is an actual a visual representation from a provider side. So we do have PTs and OTs, so physical and occupational therapists, using what we call our provider dashboard to help people get telehealth services across the country. And this is kind of what they would see when they were doing a live evaluation or a live treatment session. And so what you can see here, as Patrick moves down into flexion and up into extension, those values are actually shown on our graph. And there's actually 3 lines here on the upper panel here in our angle panel, but no worries, they are just different values that we're looking at the same effective thing. They're instantaneous maximum angles and minimum angles, but we'll just simplify it and look at the average angle. It's a bit clearer of a representation there. And so you can see here that as he's indicated to move up, he's requiring a little bit of assistance, but it's around 60% maximum is what is actually required to get him up into that angle goal. And so you can see that we have about 10 degrees to minus 10 degrees is the total range of motion that Patrick has right now. And so that earlier example that I gave, pumping up to midpoint about 0 degrees, would hold true for this case. And we can go back over here to our video and see how he is progressing on our activity. Have about 30 seconds left here, so we'll see if we can squeeze out a couple more repetitions. Patrick, so we'll have you go up as far as you can into extension. See if we can get that bar well above our strongman's head. Very good. Very good. Let's see if we can get one more repetition in about 10 more seconds. And again, I encourage, for those of you who do have the hand mentor, if you have any questions about any of these activities, don't hesitate to post it in the comments. We'll be sure to answer those questions as well. Also, if this is your first time experiencing the hand mentor and you have even general questions about, well, what the heck is the hand mentor? Feel free to post that as well, and we'll be sure to address that. Great, and it looks like we have our next activity posed up here. And this one is a little bit different than our strongman activity, simply because it requires the integration of a dynamic visual stimuli. And this is what we call cosmic tennis. For those of you who have played arcade games in the past, you'll kind of recognize the gameplay a little bit, and so it might be very familiar to you here. And go ahead and hit play here, Patrick, and we can go ahead and start the activity. Very good. And just to kind of orient you to the activity, the gameplay, Patrick is controlling the paddle on the right-hand side. And so as Patrick moves up and down into extension and flexion respectively, that will move the paddle up and down on the right-hand side of the screen. And our goal is primarily, at least the gaming activity's goal, is to try to score as many points as you can. But encoded inside of that gameplay is your sort of requirement to move. And so instead of going to the clinic or using your weights or your stretchy bands at home, now you can do those movements in a virtual environment, and it can be a bit more enjoyable. And so instead of doing three sets of 10 exercises, now you can get hundreds of activity movements with the hand mentor. And just to kind of go back to our sort of special topic here of is the outpatient sort of dosing sufficient? And I think we've maybe addressed that pretty clearly. But then I guess the next question that emerges naturally from this is, well, how can we increase our rehab dose to get that sufficient stimuli? And one of the key ways to do this is to engage in a dedicated rehab program in your home. And that is one of the best ways to actually improve and accelerate your recovery. And the hand mentor is one of those ways that will actually help you get those repetitions that you require. Very good. So it looks like Patrick is doing a good job here to play against our computer. On the left-hand side is our red computer. It looks like he just got his first score there. Very good, Patrick. And so it turns out that in this activity, while we can also control the amount of rest to work ratio as well, and if we increase that rest to work ratio, that would actually sort of decrease the number of repetitions per unit time. What we would want to do is we want to sort of decrease the rest to work ratio, meaning less rest for a given work period, and that would then increase the number of repetitions. And these things are handled, we basically have an artificial intelligence in the background that's informed by clinical practice as to progress the rehab program to make it more and more challenging. And one of those ways that it does that is it actually will increase the number of repetitions that you have to do in a unit at a time. And will also sort of decrease that rest period as well. And so this will help not only get more repetitions and higher the dose, but it will help to increase your endurance as well. That was a pretty slick move there, Patrick, trying to knock it against the top there. So David, do we have any questions coming in?
Here's a question that we get pretty often. What if I can, this is coming from Joe from Michigan.
Okay.
What if I don't have any movement? Can I still use the hand mentor as a mode of therapy?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question, Joe, and welcome to the Rehab Power Hour. And in terms of whether or not you can engage in the hand mentor, foot mentor therapy, is with a various amount of movement is a very, very good question. And the simple answer is you can engage in the hand mentor or the foot mentor therapy with little to no movement. There is no prerequisite to having a large amount of volitional control of your upper and lower extremity to engage in this. That's one of the benefits of having the dynamic assistance from the actual actuator itself, right? And both of the hand and the foot mentor, they have a externalized muscle. So if you can imagine, just like your muscle can contract and relax, the hand mentor and the foot mentor have these actuators that can contract and relax and help provide an additional muscle to help augment your movement if you're having trouble initiating that movement or actually accessing your full range of motion. And what I mean by accessing that full range of motion is you may have, I guess rather, let me back up just a quick second here and say there's a couple different types of movement, right? There is what's called active control. We might hear the term AROM or AROM from your clinicians. And this active range of motion is your ability to volitionally control your limb. Whereas passive movement is the ability for someone else to move your limb where you're just relaxed. And oftentimes what happens after a neurologic injury is those things are a bit incongruent, meaning the passive range of motion may be much larger than your active movement. And in this case, we would want to increase your ability to volitionally control your either your arm or hand or your foot and ankle with the hand or foot mentor. And that's what they're really good at doing. And so even if you have very, very small amounts of movement, even a fraction degree of movement, the hand mentor can detect this and amplify your movement with the air muscle itself, with that dynamic assistance. And it's not just actually even a fixed amount of assistance either. Just like your muscles can contract harder or less hard, depending on the context. The hand mentor can operate in the same way, right? If you need more assistance, maybe further up in the range of motion where you may be even weaker, or if you are up in a range of motion, say in your wrist or hand up into far extension, where your flexor tone, that tone, that spasticity may kick in, you may need more help to get up there. We want you to get up there and to be able to control your movement because we require that for function. And so the hand mentor can then put in even a bit more assistance where you may need that additional boost. So thanks for that question. Hopefully the weather's not too cold up there in Michigan as of yet. I know we're in sort of early mid-December now, so I imagine there's probably some snow on the ground, maybe some ice on the lakes up there. But again, keep.
Well, I think
coming. Yeah.
I think anything colder than 32 degrees is too cold for us out of Hotlanta.
I agree. That's one of the reasons why we're well. I guess not one of the main reasons, but it's certainly a happy outcome of being based in Atlanta, right? We still get some seasons, but we certainly don't have those harsh winters. So. Well, it looks like we have progressed onto one of our new games. This new therapeutic activity is called Plinko. And this is a really fun game. It's a multi-step activity and requires both of your limbs, actually. And so one of the primary activity, which is going on right now, is required to be performed by your arm or your arm and your hand in a hand mentor. And so there's a virtual sort of hand that you can see that's trying to go down and pick up our ball. And when we first start the activity, you're actually going to be using your, I guess, ipsilateral limb to your brain injury. So it would be your less affected limb to actually place or suggest where the ball should be dropped from. And so this can help with your kind of strategy to kind of maximize those points. And we'll see that just here in a second. As our Plinko ball goes and gets a couple hundred points there. Very good. So as you can see in the top of the screen there's that blue sort of blue and teal bar that appears. Feel free to use your less affected limb that's not in the hand mentor to select anywhere along that blue bar, and that will define where the ball will drop from. And as you can see, we did that repetition very, very quickly. So Patrick must have gotten a bit more movement in that time. You're getting a bunch of points there. Very good, Patrick. And so this activity is really interesting because it not only is the same sort of movements, right? We're working on coupling those flexors and extensors, but actually having the visual representation of your hand doing the movement is very good. This can help with mental imagery. And when you do mental imagery practice, we show that there's actually some really nice benefits from doing that as well. So several of the actual activities will have a virtual representation of your hand present on the hand mentor console. And so this will help with that kind of mapping and that relearning. And so if, for instance, you maybe don't have any active movement, being able to feel that sensory feedback from the hand mentor helping you move, in addition to that visual representation of a hand moving up and down, can be very, very potent combination to help with your recovery process. And there is the literature is replete with examples of the importance of this sort of combination or multimodal approach to neuro rehab. What we can do right now is we can actually go back and check our data on the provider side just to see how things are going. And this is what I would do periodically as a provider if I was working with someone. I would come over here to our provider table, and this shows us the movements that Patrick's able to do. And interestingly enough, you can see over the last couple of repetitions, he is gaining more and more range of motion over time. And if you can see my cursor on the top right-hand side of our panel, you can see that we started off kind of around it's around 3 maybe degrees of extension. And again, just to remind you, our convention here is anything in the positive domain is going to be extension value. Anything below that in the negative range is going to be a flexion value. And so you can see in that first repetition of the Plinko game, he was holding off around 3 degrees here, and then increasing it to maybe 5, and then we got to around 6.5 or so, and then up into, let's see, almost to 7 or 8 right there in that last session. Very good. Those are pretty good improvements, and this is not unexpected. Even in intra-game or intra-session improvements in range of motion are kind of expected, and we often see this type of change. And often this is occurring because maybe that tone in your flexors are actually sort of going down, which allows you access to more extension range of motion. Very good. So you can go back and check on his progress here and see how things are going. It looks like we are on to our next activity. This is called Space Shooter, and this is our specific endurance activity. So this one doesn't have any prescribed rest periods in it, and that's intentional because we need to work on endurance and also some precise movement control over the long period of time. And so as you can see on the screen, Patrick is controlling the spaceship on the bottom of our screen as it goes left to right. And so as Patrick moves up into extension, the spaceship actually will go to the right-hand side of the screen. And he's actually encouraged by nature of having these indestructible comets in his way. He is having to then move. And I know there might be some gamers out there that might know about camping, or maybe finding a specific spot in the actual gameplay where you can kind of hang out there and not move around and increase the score that way. We've had some really clever software designers and game designers come up with a nice strategy to encourage you to continue moving. And this is one of those ways. And as Patrick then moves down into flexion, he goes to the left-hand side of the screen. And we understand that these are a little bit different mapping, right? When he goes up and down, he's moving left to right. And that difference in mapping, sort of that diversity in motor control, is also really important to the generalizability of a rehab program. And we don't want to have it be simply just the standard up and down movements and the same sort of visual environment. That could be a little bit boring, and so we have a rich repertoire of virtual environments that you can play in and do your movements in. And for those of you who have not seen this activity before, the reason why it has some fine motor control as well as endurance is Patrick is having to negotiate very, very small gaps to move the ship around. And what that's requiring him to do is that's requiring him to find a position that's mapped to his visual environment, and then map his hand to that very, very specific position, and then hold it there. And that holding it there requires a high level of control. And so this is, of all of the activities that the Hand Mentor has, this is one of the more complex ones. And so if you find yourself playing this activity along with us in our prescription, and you find this is maybe a bit too challenging for you, don't worry, that's totally fine. You can always pause the game by touching the screen at any place. That should depressurize the Hand Mentor itself, and you can go ahead and skip it if you find it is too challenging for you at the moment. So don't worry about that. And your standard prescription will be reinstantiated once you have completed our Rehab Power Hour today. So if you find this is a new one for you and you think it's a little bit too challenging, don't worry. It will not be there for your standard prescription. And so it looks like Patrick is doing a really good job. And he's actually not controlling the firing rate. The firing rate happens to increase when you get these bonus and sort of power-ups that may drop down. We'll see them here in a moment as he progresses in the actual game. And as you notice, he's trying real hard to destroy those asteroids there, but doesn't happen to work. They are indestructible. And those are actually those falling green plus signs are lives. So those are good. Those will actually help you stay alive longer in the game so you can continue to play. So we do want to try to collect as many of those as possible. And so this one's pretty challenging as you first maybe start to have this activity placed in your prescription under normal circumstances. We might want to reduce the total time. Right now, I think Patrick has this one set for 5 or so minutes. And what we would do over time is we would actually increase that amount of time to get more and more endurance. And this is actually one of these activities that is a real potent increase in dose. And so because there is no rest period, he's having to constantly move. And so we find that even in a short period of time of a space shooter game, we get maybe several tens to hundreds of repetitions. And this is, again, one of those potent drivers to increasing the neuroplasticity in your brain. And one thing that you might have noticed too, as Patrick continues to progress in the activity in the game, the sort of environment changes a little bit, right? It becomes more and more complex. And so what you find is that the better you get, the more challenging the games become. Right now, the actual spaceships are starting to shoot back. They're not just sort of passively there to get in his way. So it becomes a much more complex visual environment and sort of motor control environment that he has to coordinate in and operate in. And so while we wait for our next activity to spin up here, maybe I'll reach back out to David, and see, do we have any existing questions that have come in?
Yeah, so we have a question here about the pneumatics. So at the beginning, the pneumatics make it more difficult for me to bend my hand down, and I have flexion movement outside of the Hand Mentor. But I feel like when I have the Hand Mentor on, I don't have the same movement. Why is this? And we got this this question over email.
Okay, great. So this is a really important question to address. And I think one thing that we have to consider is that the Hand Mentor physically goes on you. And so that what that means is that actually is incorporated on your forearm and your wrist and your hand. And so it actually adds in a little bit of weight to your hand itself. And so the whole hand mentor itself weighs around 1.5 pounds, 1.75 pounds. So there, by nature of having some additional weight on your hand and your arm, it's going to be a bit more challenging for your muscles to move. That's the first thing. But by nature of having a actual assistance component, i.e. the pneumatics, you will actually be able to probably move more with the hand mentor on, despite it having some additional weight or increasing the inertial load on your limb. Is sort of the science or engineering way of describing that. But specifically, the question I think you're asking is about what happens when the device maybe starts to put some assistance in, and then you have trouble resisting that. And this is a really, really common experience because outside of the device, outside of the hand mentor, you may find like you can close your hand. But with the actual hand mentor on, you may not be able to close your hand fully. And that's because the hand mentor is specifically designed to help increase that extension. And under certain circumstances, we really don't want to encourage that flexion. And so the hand mentor may, in fact, resist that closing of your hand and going into flexion. But in instances that we want to work on that, the hand mentor will switch its operation into what's called, in motor control theory, is called an admittance control, meaning it will start to reduce the amount of assistance or the amount of pressure in it to allow you to move. And this is very different than what's called an impedance control in motor control theory world, where impedance is exactly as the name describes. It's trying to impede movement. So if we're trying to resist movement into flexion to help maybe stretch out those flexors or really encourage movement into extension, the hand mentor will provide the assistance or that resistance to impede that movement that you want to prefer to go into flexion. And so, because this is really common, what happens right after a stroke, you might basically the kind of wires get crossed. And even if you're trying to go into extension, you might find that you go into flexion, right? That's just because you're driving the nervous system really hard. The effort is really, really high. And what happens is in that balancing act, in that tug of war, the flexors usually win just because they're stronger. And so the hand mentor can then come in here and be in sort of an impediment to that tendency to go into flexion and allow you the opportunity to learn to control extension. So very, very common to experience that resistance into flexion. But don't worry, that is expected behavior. And it's actually good that it's doing that in certain circumstances. And so for those activities that require both down and up movements, the hand mentor will start in that sort of admittance control to get you up to that midpoint, and then help you with admittance control to go down into flexion when the goal of the actual activity is to go down into flexion. So thanks for that question. I know it was a really long-winded explanation there, and I hope that does answer that question. And so right now we actually have another activity. This is a pretty brand new one, I'd say. Maybe the last couple of weeks we have rolled this one out. This is called solitaire. It's exactly as the name describes. Everyone's played solitaire on a Sunday afternoon, and why not do rehab with it? And so the gameplay is exactly as solitaire is supposed to be. And what we have on the top left side is we have our face down deck, and we have our playing field. And so again, this is another bimanual or two-limbed activity, and it requires using the limb that's not only in the hand mentor itself, but your other hand as well. And the way you actually play this activity is you got to search for a given play. So you have to find a valid card move, and then you can use your less affected limb, the one that's not in the hand mentor, to select the card that you want to move. And then it will be illuminated in an outline of red. And once you see that illumination, you'll then select the next place, basically the place that you want the the card to be placed to. And then once that selection has been made, and it's a valid one, right? Because we don't want you to be making all kind of crazy moves. You'll then be cued with the hand representation here, that virtual hand, to move down into flexion to pick up the card, and then move up into extension to place it at its new location. And so this is a really cool way to have a standard card game act as a really, really nice addition to your rehab program. And so we will be progressing to our next activity here. And while we do this, this is a really fun one. This one's called fishing, and this one is a bit complex, and it's one of the more challenging ones, just like spaceship or space shooter. And so this activity requires, again, not only tracking of a visual target, but then you have to match the visual target in real time with your arm and hand position. So that's why this one's very, very challenging. So for those of you who may have some visual complications following your neurologic injury, this can be a really good one to kind of work together to integrate our visual and kinematic and kinetic information. So visual is pretty clear, and our kinematic and kinetic information is coming from our muscles and our limbs. And so on the left-hand side, you can see we have a little fish icon. And that fish icon will randomly go up and down, just as you would experience with a fish on the line in the real life, right? It may be a bit sporadic. Its behavior might be a bit challenging to accommodate. And what you have to do is you're actually controlling the green bar. The green bar is that basically you can think of it as the tension on the fishing line, right? You don't want to have that tension too hard because you might snap it, and you don't want to have it too loose because the fish will just swim away. And so you have to have that tension on the line exactly in line with where the fish is. And so the goal is to maintain that fish inside of our green bar. And so that's where you're having to dynamically take in that visual information and then output the appropriate amount of movement with your arm or hand. So that with that, it's really, really complex and really challenging, but it's a really, really good a form of rehab for those who have that movement. And as you actually have the fish inside of our green bar, you'll notice that that second blue bar on the right-hand side is actually beginning to increase. And so just like many of the other activities, we have a completion bar that indicates when you actually reach your goal. And so when that blue bar gets all the way up to the top, you'll actually catch the fish. And so as the time, or I guess rather, when the fish is outside of the green bar, you'll notice that that blue bar actually starts to decrease. And so we want to try to have that blue bar increase the whole time and have very little time when it's actually decreasing. And so if it does take you a bit of time to actually sort of get the hang of this, don't worry about it. We do find that this is one of the more challenging activities. And so if you do find that it is a bit too tough, have no fear. Feel free to give it a try and see if you can manage it. And if you can't, you can go ahead and press the screen anywhere, and that will bring up the pause screen, and you can go ahead and skip to our next activity. So it looks like Patrick's doing pretty well here. He's caught several fish and gotten some nice points here. And while we wait for him to complete this, I'll actually go back and check over our evaluations page and see exactly how his movements are going. And this is actually some really interesting data. You can see that the hand mentor is operated in two different ways right now. It actually switched from the dynamic amount of assistance. Let me actually just orient you guys that way you're not going to be looking at just these random lines. On the top, we have, again, our angles. So these are the instantaneous angles that Patrick is moving in. And on the bottom, we have our assistance percentages. So these go from 0 to 100. Currently, I think our maximum values here that Patrick's achieving around 70% assistance. And one thing that's really interesting is in some of these activities, there is a wide range of assistance percentages. So this is a wide range of forces that the hand mentor is trying to help with. But that's different in this situation here, where there's a very, very flat amount of assistance. And this actually happens to be our space shooter game here, where there is a fixed amount of assistance in it as he's doing these repetitions in these types of endurance activities. And so this is where the hand mentor actually kind of switches modes, if you will, and changes the way it actually interacts with you to help cause a different type of stimuli. And so we can go back over here to our video and see how he's doing. increase the score even more and gotten a couple more fish there. So good job, Patrick. And so I know we are coming down to probably like the last 12 or 10 minutes of our Rehab Power Hour. So I would encourage you, if you do have questions offline, feel free to comment or send us an email. We'll be happy to answer any questions offline. Also, if you would like to be featured on our next Rehab Power Hour or future Rehab Power Hour, also send us an email, and we'll be sure to I guess set up a time when you can join and we can do an evaluation or a treatment session live and discuss anything that you would like to discuss as well. So then we have a few more activities that we have to get through. David, how are the comments? Do you have any interesting questions coming through?
We have a couple of questions here. Let me just look over here. Okay.
Well, while you look over them, let me just introduce this next activity. How about that?
Yeah, please go for it.
So this next activity is a classic. It's an oldie but a goodie. We call it Brick Breaker. And so this one, you're controlling the actual paddle on the bottom. And what your goal is to try to destroy all the bricks on the top of our screen. And you do this by ricocheting the ball back and forth. And so as Patrick is moving his paddle to the right, I guess rather he's going up into extension, which then moves the paddle to the right. He's then going to move that paddle down into I guess his hand mentor down into flexion to move his paddle to the left-hand side. This activity is pretty much good for everyone. We have built in the dynamic assistance. So anyone who has even a tiny fraction of movement or no movement at all will be able to engage in this activity. So this is a really common one that people will engage in. So Dave, sorry to interrupt you there. Would you like to bring up some of those comments?
Yeah, we have a pretty good question here. How can you see from your side, Nick, that someone's making improvements or getting better?
Yes, this is a really fun one to answer, and I fear that it will take a long time to answer that question. But we can maybe even have just a couple of examples of how I know someone's getting better.
Maybe give us a preview, and we could use this as a topic for another
session.
session.
Yeah, that was actually one of my special topics for an upcoming Rehab Power Hour was how do you know the hand mentor is helping you get better? How do you know that's working? So yeah, I'll just give as you say, a little preview, a little tidbit, if you will. There's a couple of really simple ways that we can actually evaluate your progress. And that comes down to your range of motion and the assistance that you actually require. And so primarily the hand mentor operates in a couple of parameters, right? It can actually change the way it interacts with you with the range of motion. So it can have more or less range of motion. As you gain range of motion, it will also increase range of motion. And so as you progress and improve your function and your activities, the hand mentor will detect that and it will increase your range of motion. It does this on a second-by-second basis, and it will also present this to you in the reports, right? So as after each therapy session that you engage in, we encourage you to look at your reports to see your progress. And that will present not only the number of movements that you do, but the change in your range of motion within that day, or also since you started using the hand mentor. So that's one really key way that I actually evaluate whether or not someone is improving. And so this then is a pretty objective way, right? Because the range of motion doesn't change. It's a very stable measure. And so it doesn't matter necessarily what temperature it is outside. A range of motion is a range of motion. And so that's probably one of the key ways to do it. I'll quickly give another way. And this is a bit more complex, right? Because the hand mentor is providing some assistance. And so one of the key parameters that we look at, and this was a bit more challenging to talk through, but effectively, you can imagine that there is a amount of assistance that will be put into the device, and that results in a amount of movement that you can produce. We call this the assisted range of motion. And so as that assisted range of motion goes up, we would draw the inference that you're getting better. But what happens if the hand mentor is just providing a bit more assistance? And that would kind of obscure necessarily your progress. And so what we look at is we can actually normalize things with respect to the amount of assistance, and that will give us an idea of how much you can move independent of the hand mentor's assistance. So that's a really good one as well. And then the final one that I'll bring up today, these are primarily hand mentor derived measures. But the third one is effectively, we would want ultimately to have the hand mentor not provide you any assistance at all, right? Because that means that you have full volitional control of your arm or your foot in the case of the foot mentor. So we will monitor the amount of assistance that you require. And as you progress and as you improve, the amount of assistance that you need will go down. And so as that number of assistants, or I guess that value of assistance goes down, that is indicative of progress. And that could be independent of rather the other two measures, truthfully. And so we like to monitor all three of these things in combination, which gives us a good idea of the sort of total progress. And so that would be kind of just a snippet of our larger conversation surrounding whether or not the hand mentor is, helping you in terms of progress. So good. So it looks like we were able to get through our full session today. And I'd say, do we have any sort of follow-up questions, Dave, or is there anything that I missed?
We have a couple of questions here about getting better. I think you addressed here, and then also about how the assistance can change over time. Maybe we'll make some announcements for next time as we're closing down here on our last few minutes of our power hour.
Sure.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead. Well, so we're actually I think we have a guest user that we're going to be featuring on Wednesday. And again, I'll just shameless plug here. If you want to be a featured user for one of these power hour sessions, where Nick can give you some kind of personal attention to your rehab needs, as well as kind of make sure to address and tweak the settings that you have to make sure that they're working for you, please email powerhour@motusnova.com, and we'll get you on the wait list to be featured there. And then in addition, you want to say something about Wednesday coming up, Nick?
Yeah, so I think we had a couple of comments asking to be featured, and so we were able to, I guess, get our featured guests set up for Wednesday. And so we will have a couple of really interesting things. I know our guest has some really nice insights about his stroke recovery, and so we'll be talking about that, as well as doing a bit of that evaluation process. And so you'll see kind of how a clinician such as myself would engage with the hand mentor, and how we can remotely control it and remotely evaluate things. And that way we can then fine tune the hand mentor to his specific needs. And we'll be able to also monitor how those things change within a given session. And so we'll have some nice conversation about those sort of nuances of control of the hand mentor. So those would be our primary topics for this coming Wednesday.
All right, great. And I just want to give a preview to everyone here that following Wednesday's session, we're still scheduling right now, but we'll have a neurosurgeon on the power hour as well as a guest to talk about kind of his experience working with patients with traumatic brain injury. I know that most of our users are stroke survivors, but we do have some individuals that have had a traumatic brain injury and show, the recovery process is very similar to that of for stroke survivors. I'm sure you can talk about that as well, Nick. Yeah, we'll have a neurosurgeon on, and we'll do a little bit of talk through his experience working with the brain, as well as, of course, opening it up for a Q&A. So be sure to watch out for that and join us and ask the questions that you want to ask a brain surgeon
Yeah, and I think we have a few guests lined up. So I think, as I said at the top of the hour, one of our goals is to not only have a community in which we can do rehab together virtually, but we'll also be featuring guests like this who are experts in their field who can give you guys insight, and you get an opportunity to ask them questions. And so we do have neurosurgeons scheduled. We have a couple of neurophysiologists and primarily neuroscience-y people, right? So we also have some pedagogical experts about how PTs and OTs get trained, right? How do you actually learn how to be a PT to help someone recover from a stroke? And so we have a lot of really exciting content and guests coming up. And we would also encourage anyone who maybe has a caregiver, if they want to give their perspective, we'd be happy to have a caregiver on to share their experience. So I think, yeah, we've got a lot of exciting sessions coming up. We have power hours. And so we'll be looking forward to each of you joining us in the future.
All right, very good. Well, I think we're wrapping up now at the end of the hour here, and we'll remind everyone that our next session is for Wednesday, this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that's going to be 4 p.m. Pacific for all of you on the West Coast. Be sure to join us here on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll also have our Instagram stream up as well. So pick your platform of choice, and we'll see you there.
Very good. Thanks so much, Dave, for sending out those details. I just want to wish everyone a happy rest of your Sunday. Hope you stay healthy, and I hope you all continue to get